Well, hello everybody, and welcome back again to this week's class. Hi, and we're back with another lesson in our series, Flex, God Looks at the Heart. We've been doing this for like 6 weeks now. This is our 6th lesson, and tonight we're doing the Heart of Unrealized Potential. So it's a really exciting one. I've actually been looking forward to this particular lesson because I think it's a good one for us to talk about. I feel like it's something that we kind of think about a lot as young adults, as we're starting to make our way through kind of regular adulthood and leaving behind some of the other things from our past. So we're going to get to that in just a minute. Just going to say, oh, hey, Tanner, thanks for watching. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. A couple of announcements first, of course. The events that we announced last Wednesday night have been postponed. So we will have updates and details about that later. There was just a few things just could not come together at the right time to make it possible for us to do the service project this Saturday and the outing on Sunday evening. So we'll be doing those just later on. Either later on this month or early next month. So that's kind of what's going on there. In addition, so next week we'll have one more class. And then after that, we will not have a class on Wednesday night. So the week of Thanksgiving, we will not have a class. Spend that time with your families and being safe and enjoying your turkey, lunches or dinners or whatever you do during that time. But yeah, I think that's everything I've got for tonight. So let's get started. So the Heart of Unrealized Potential. And so our sort of focus verse is going to be 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 22. Now, for the purposes of this lesson, we're really going to be covering a lot of ground in 1 Samuel. So we're not going to be reading everything because otherwise we'd be reading like 4 or 5 chapters of 1 Samuel all at once. We're kind of going to be talking about a lot about Saul's early, like leading up to him becoming king and like his early reign. Like that's pretty fair assessment, I think. So, but we'll be touching a lot of scripture throughout, but in just sort of these small verse chunks. Yeah. Because otherwise, like I said, paraphrasing some of the scripture, because otherwise we'd be here for like a half hour just reading 4 or 5 chapters of scripture. So 1 Samuel chapter 10, verse 22. And this is how it goes. It says, "So they inquired further of the Lord, 'Has the man come here yet?' And the Lord said, 'Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies.'" Boy. What a start to Saul's reign as king, right? So, I mean, over the years, Janelle and I, we've been a part of many churches. We've come into contact with several congregations, and not just here in Arizona, but through our mission work in Arlington, in Texas, through mission trips and other sorts of connections here and there, and we've been a part of many churches. Oftentimes it's just we've been there for like one Sunday. Other times we've been there for a couple of weeks, and obviously in Arlington we've been there for a few years. And there is sort of this common phrasing that we hear a lot when we visit other churches, other congregations, and I wish it was something like the church is growing, the church is active, the church is very involved, but that's really not what we hear. What's the phrase that we hear?
There's a lot of potential.
There's a lot of potential here. Our congregation has great potential. There's just one problem with that, though, is that potential is rarely realized. It's rarely made to be made real. And so not only do many churches never reach their true potential, but also many church leaders and many Christians. And that's kind of where we're going to be at for tonight's lesson, where we'll touch a little bit more later on about churches and church leaders in general, because I think that's important for us to talk about. But Christians, we as Christians, we fail to live up to our potential. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 9, God grants the selfish demands of the Israelite nation by choosing a king for them. If you remember from last week, the elders came up and they told Samuel really nasty, rude things. They were like, "You're old, your sons are terrible, and we need a king." But it was mostly because they wanted to be like everybody else, not because of those reasons.
Samuel.
Yeah, not because of Samuel. But so God says, yes, sure, you can have a king. And he chooses one for them. So in that first glance, King Saul, has all the markings of a powerful king. He has kind of all the right stuff on paper, right? So, but there was one attribute deeply embedded in his character that would not allow him to reach his maximum potential. And the fact is, like, many of us have this same problem. This is the same attitude. This is the same thing that holds churches back, church leaders back, and us as Christians. What holds us back from reaching the potential that God knows we have. So, what are the characteristics of a king? So, when one looks at the attributes of Saul, which are mentioned throughout chapters 9 through 13, we see the description of a mighty king, or at least someone who could be a mighty king. He had all the attributes people were looking for. First off, his appearance. That was a big deal, and it still is a big deal. We want the people in charge of us to look good. We want to be proud that our leaders are attractive, are interesting, who are engaging. And so in 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, it describes Saul, and he's pretty kingly. He sounds pretty kingly anyway. It says 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2. It says, he was described as handsome a young man as could be found anywhere in Israel, and he was a head taller than anyone else. Not only do we want our leaders to be attractive, but we want them to be tall. We want them to physically tower over everybody else. Why is that? I'm not a psychologist, so I can't say. I don't know. What do you think? Why is that? Is there what do you think? Is there a sense of comfort or something in there?
I think so. I mean, again, we want to follow someone that we can admire.
Yeah,
and
literally look up to.
Being tall makes us think confidence.
Yeah.
I mean, how many times have we been told, stand tall, walk tall, keep your chin up,
right.
It's all because it's whether you have confidence or not. If you're tall or you're holding yourself tall, it looks like you are comfortable and have confidence. So
Saul, according to 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 2, he was sort of the stereotypical tall, dark, and handsome type, right? Which actually makes it funnier later when we see him be among the luggage and the baggage, because this tall kind of prominent person trying to hide. And we'll get to that. So not only was he attractive, he also had the correct tribal affiliation. So he came from the tribe of Benjamin. The Benjamites were the smallest tribe of Israel. They're the one with the fewest citizens. But they had a very interesting reputation. They were very highly respected for their physical might, for their like in battle and power. So in the blessing of Jacob, Benjamin is described as a ravenous wolf. And although the term ravenous wolf, when we hear about it in the New Testament, it's not a positive thing, it's not a good thing. Most scholars consider this to referring to the might of the tribe of Benjamin. So in short, the Benjamites were small in number, but they knew how to fight. So we see an example of this military might in chapter 11, when Saul defeats the Amorites in a really powerful fashion. In chapter 11, verse 11, it says, "The next day, Saul separated his men into 3 divisions. During the last watch of the night, they broke into the camp of the Ammonites and slaughtered them until the heat of the day. Those who survived were scattered so that no 2 of them were left together." Really vicious, really strong, take no prisoners type of people. So above all these attributes, of course, is the fact that God picked Saul. So we know he's the tall, dark, and handsome. He comes from the right tribe that has military and physical strength. But of course, God picked him. In 1 Samuel 9, When Samuel sees Saul, God tells him, this is the man who is going to end up governing his people. In 1 Samuel 10, we read that Samuel anoints Saul as king of Israel. He's anointed into this position, but also empowered by God to carry out that task. So he's got everything going for him, right? Like on paper, Saul is the right person to be the king of the Israelites.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's nothing that can you can't argue against it. So all of these things seem to indicate that Saul is going to be this mighty and powerful king. Yet we know from reading further, if you read past chapter 10, it becomes a series of blunders and sort of comical errors in many cases, but lots of serious blunders, mistakes, and defiance and fear that end up kind of plaguing Saul's reign as king. He wasn't the mighty and powerful king he was made out to be. Because that's the thing about potential. It's just that. It's potential. It's not real. It's not the thing that is. It's the thing that could be. And as we all know, just because it could be doesn't mean it will be. So a church may have a beautiful building or a great location, but it might never grow. A man may meet every biblical qualification to be an elder, but they might be just a terrible leader. And a Christian may have incredible talent, only to go and bury it in the field. So if you know that story, that's where we're going after this. In most cases, potential is never reached for the same reason that Saul never reached his. Just because you've got the qualifications doesn't mean when push comes to shove, you'll necessarily be the person for the job. So, what is the thing that held him back? What is the thing? Well, I would say fear. Mm-hmm. Do you agree?
Yeah. It's a fear.
Fear. And so fear is a very paralyzing. In fact, this is the next section, the paralyzing power of fear. So I'm going to tell you guys a story about the Soviet Union. So that's Russia pre-1989, like Russia before like any of us watching were born. During his years as the premier of Russia, of the Soviet Union rather, Nikita Khrushchev denounced many of the policies and atrocities of Joseph Stalin. And if you guys know your world history, Joseph Stalin was the communist dictator of the Soviet Union, responsible for many deaths and very horrible things in Russia. But in the midst of one of the speeches that Khrushchev was delivering, sort of denouncing, all of these things that Stalin did, they were wrong, they were bad. In the midst of one of those speeches, a heckler shouted at him, "Well, you were one of his colleagues. Why didn't you stop him?" Have you ever been in a situation like that where it's like somebody kind of calls you out for like the hypocrisy of your behavior?
Oh, I'm sure it's happened. Nothing is coming straight to mind.
I mean, like none of us are like world leaders, so it's not like we would ever have to be like that embarrassed. But
yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I can't think of anything like this intense, obviously, but like I'm sure like you and I both have been called out at some point or another for something we've done. We even called out each other. But so this person calls out Nikita Khrushchev. He says, "Well, you were one of his colleagues. You worked with Stalin," because he did. That's the thing. Khrushchev worked with Stalin. He was part of the administration of Joseph Stalin. Why didn't he stop him? It's all well and good to denounce everything after it's already done, but you had the chance there. So Khrushchev, in the midst of that, he screams out, "Well, who said that?" And there was this deathly silence because nobody in the room dared move a muscle. You got to remember, Khrushchev is now in the same position. He's the premier of the Soviet Union. He's in the same position that Stalin was. He is the leader of the country. Nobody would move a muscle. Nobody would step up and say, "I was the one that called you out." And so Khrushchev then says, now you know why. Fear can silence us. It can confuse us and it can paralyze us from doing the right thing. So where is this headed? Well, Saul was paralyzed by fear in many, many instances throughout his reign. And those fears that paralyzed him, he ended up with very serious consequences. So Saul never reached that potential because of fear. When we first heard that he was to be king, when he first heard he was going to be king, in 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 21, he says, but am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin? Why do you say such a thing to me? Already from the moment he finds out he's supposed to be the king, he's scared. He says, but I come from like nothing. I come from the least valuable place. I'm not really worth anything. Why are you telling me this? Why are you making me king? He felt inadequate to be king because he could not fully trust God. And even when he was supposed to wait for Samuel to offer sacrifices, this is also later on after he's already king. When he's supposed to wait for Samuel to offer sacrifices, Saul went ahead and made the sacrifice himself because he felt Samuel was taking too long. He wanted to start the battle before his men grew weary of waiting. He wasn't waiting for God's timing. He wasn't waiting for the instructions. He let his fear paralyze him. And so he couldn't act in the proper way. In chapter 10, we find two other occasions where we're paralyzed by fear. In verse 9 of chapter 10, he literally tries to sneak out of the room before God changes his heart. And later in the chapter is one of the most comical scenes, probably in the whole Bible. Like, there's several really funny parts of the Bible, but this is probably one of the funniest. All of the tribes of Israel have gathered. Like, everybody's in Jerusalem. All of like the big important people from all of the tribes from all over the country have gathered together because they're about to watch the anointing of their brand new king. It's exciting. It's like the same level of like the royal wedding, you know, that kind of exciting moment where they're like, finally, God has given us the thing we wanted. And it's supposed to be Saul. And everybody's there. Yet when the ceremony begins, the ceremony's already begun. Nobody can find Saul. Samuel inquires as to his location, and God has to respond. Because God knows, of course. But God has to respond. And that's our sort of key verse from the very beginning. Chapter 10, verse 22b. Yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies. He's hiding in the luggage. What? The future king of Israel is just hiding a baggage claim. Like, think of that. Imagine if any of our world leaders are any past or present presidents that we've had in this country, or the prime minister of the United Kingdom. Imagine them hiding among suitcases, boxes. What kind of a leader is that would do such a thing? And remember, Saul has everything right on paper. He's tall. He's physically imposing. He's from the right tribe. He's chosen by God. As far as he should be concerned, he's got everything he needs. All he's got to do is trust. But he can't do it because he's paralyzed by that fear. So, what are we afraid of? That's kind of our third part here before we wind down. What are we afraid of? What are churches who never reach their potential afraid of? What are leaders who hide among the baggage afraid of? What are Christians who bury their talent afraid of? What are we afraid of? What do you think?
We're afraid as churches and leaders, I think, like, we're afraid to lose people. We're afraid of conflict. We're afraid that it won't work out. We're afraid that we'll be judged for our decisions. It's a lot of self-imposed peer pressure, I think.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I think the biggest thing that we're afraid of, like, and all of that is true, and all that ties into this. But I think the biggest thing is that we're afraid of change. We're afraid of change, and admittedly, change is dramatic, and very few people embrace change. But change happens our entire lives, right? Some resist change more than others. I mean, I'm sure all of you guys watching have like a great uncle or a grandpa or a grandma that just like refuses to use a cell phone, but you might know other like older folks that like quickly embraced it, and now like they're sharing better memes than we are. Some people embrace it, some don't. But change is hard. Change is hard, and it's something that is really easy to be afraid of. On some level, we're all uneasy about change. And maybe we believe that change will bring about something that even we're more afraid of, and that's conflict. And that's where all of those things that you mentioned come in. Losing people, sort of the peer pressure on ourselves. Like, what if we fail? All of that. Conflict. Most church conflicts, let's be absolutely crystal clear, most church conflicts are not about doctrine. They're not about whether the scripture is right or wrong about certain things, or about or commands one way or the other. That's not what most church conflict is about. It would actually be a little easier if it were. If it were that. Because just look at the scriptures and then you're done. But that's not what most church conflict is. It has to do with opinion. Maybe a faction within a church wants to change the time of worship. They want to paint the nursery a different color, swap out pews with chairs, change the carpet. Ooh. We've been in that in the middle of that before, right?
Yeah.
But we've been in the church where it was a battle to change from carpet to tile in the hallways. Because the fight is not doctrinal. It's not about scripture. It's not about how we should live as Christians. It's about opinion. That's what most conflicts are. And so, unfortunately, many church leaders are aware of this, so they don't even try. They don't even try to introduce any changes. And frankly, who can blame them? When we end up being so divisive over dumb things, over really dumb things. So we're afraid of change. We're afraid of conflict. And the third one, and you talked about this too, Janelle, is we're afraid of failure. We're afraid of failure. The fear of failure isn't new. I mean, it's even from well before Saul. I mean, remember Moses? He said basically the same thing that Saul was saying. When Samuel comes up and tells Saul, "Hey, you're going to be the king," he's like, "Me? Why? I'm the least of these." What Moses say when God wants him to do stuff?
I don't even speak well.
I don't talk well. I stutter and I do this and I do that. He puts all these excuses forward. We're afraid of failure, and even Jesus tells us a story about recognizing our fear of failure. In Matthew chapter 25, he tells a story about a master who has 3 servants. And we're going to paraphrase it for our purposes, because frankly, most of the time when we tell the story about the master and the talents and the servants and stuff, we focus on like the distribution of talents. One guy has 10, one has 2, one has 1. That's not really the important part for our purposes today. It's really what they do with it, right? So this master has 3 servants. The master divided his income among them, and he said, "Hey, I'm going on a trip. Take my money, invest it for me. Make me some more money. Make me richer by the time I get back." It's a classic like Scrooge McDuck style kind of thing. Can you tell we just watched DuckTales? I'm going on a trip. Take my money and invest it for me. So, great. No problem. First guy takes the money, invests it. What does he do? He doubles it. Awesome. Master, satisfied. Second guy took the money. What happened to him?
Same thing.
Same deal. He doubled it. Master was satisfied. Third guy. Oh, this poor third guy. What does he do with his money?
Hid it.
He buries it. He just hides it and he buries it away because he was afraid he was going to lose it. And the master was obviously anything but satisfied. In fact, that's putting it really nicely because there's some serious consequences for that guy for just burying it and not using the talent the way the master wanted him to. So sometimes what we perceive as caution is really nothing more than a fear of change, of conflict, or of failure. We all have heard the expression, I would rather err on the side of caution, which seems like a reasonable thing, right? When we think about it, I was like, yeah, like if I'm going to fail, I'd rather fail by being more careful than by not, right? But to err on the side of caution is still to err. It's still an error that we're making. We're still failing. I mean, just ask one talent guy, right? He was just being cautious when he decided to bury the money. He was being careful so he didn't lose it. So there's a story. There's a book. My bad. There's a book that is about overcoming fear. It's by Dr. Edward Welch, and the title of the book is When People Are Big and God is Small. And it's a really great title. That's a really good title because it describes the deceit of the heart, right? Saul's view of God was what kept him from realizing his full potential. He saw God as small and he saw himself as bigger. He had to do more things because he couldn't trust God to do them. So in chapter 13, we see his fearful heart when he usurps Samuel's authority and offers the sacrifices before Samuel arrived. Told you we're going to come back to that one. When Samuel asked him why he did this is what he replied. So this is in 1 Samuel chapter 13, verses 11 and 12. I'm going to read it for you. 11 and 12. He said, "When I saw that the men were scattering and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." So in other words, I mean, he was afraid, right? He like sort of hid it in sort of flowery language. I mean, we were in such danger in that, like, I wanted to get God's favor, and it was just, I really wanted to get it going. But really, he was afraid. He was afraid. And then in verse 14 of that same chapter, that's it. Samuel delivers the bad news to Saul. He tells him his kingdom is not going to endure. That Saul did not trust God enough to keep the crown. And that God was already looking and had already found his successor. Saul's kingdom had potential. He was perfect on paper, the perfect candidate to lead the Israelite nation. Tall, dark, and handsome, from the right, strong tribe, hand chosen by God, anointed before the entire nation.
I think it's fair to say he was the first one. There wasn't, I mean, of course he was supposed to live up to God's standards. So
but the bar was low.
But as far as man's standard, it was like the first example.
Yeah, the bar was low. The bar was low. It was like all he had to do is be mildly competent. Really. Right?
Yeah. I mean, I get it though. Like, we'll talk about that some more later, but
you can say something.
No, it's okay. I'll save it for the conversation.
All he had to do was be competent, right? And that was like the lowest of bars. And like the nation didn't know a king before that. And God picked him, so that if he had trusted and not been paralyzed by fear, the potential could have been met. But we know that wasn't to be, because really paving the way for David. And he had his mistakes and demons and things, and we'll talk about those in the upcoming weeks. But that's the story of Saul's reign, one unrealized potential after another. So it's time, my friends, for Bible Book Club. So we've got our good friends Paul and Jaiden, who are going to be joining us tonight. Hey guys, you guys are muted. Hey, there we go. Hey. Okay. Boy, is this one crazy, right?
Yeah.
I think this one is one of the ones that is particularly hard hitting for 4Sixteen, for us as young adults. I think mostly because like we're all young still. We're still in that phase where we're like, oh, we have a lot of potential to be doing something, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're either going into like college, coming out of college, starting to maybe get married, beginning to start families, that sort of thing. Lots of stuff that is just, we have potential to do some really good things.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with this idea of the unrealized potential. Like, what were your thoughts about potential as something that like is not guaranteed?
Well, I mean, it's a very valid point to it all. It's just like, and I've gone on and on about like, saying like how everyone has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
Thing and stuff like that. And just thinking about the fear and the talk, just the talk of like lots of congregations saying that and everything like that it's interesting because like I do believe that like the age group of 416 is definitely one who needs to hear this, but there's definitely a lot in the congregation as a whole as well, because it's like that example with the Stalin successor kind of thing, where I don't know, I thought there was a lot of like hitting stuff on both ends of that kind of thing, where like we'd hate to be the person who got called out and then like he got reversed, the other person being reversed called out, and that's a big thing, is like we like I think it's not it's fear of failure, but then like so we never even step into the possibility of doing that. It's not just like trying at all kind of thing. It like takes it a layer back.
Yeah.
And stuff. I'm rambling a bit, so.
I think part of it too. I phrased it, I think, as like self-inflicted peer pressure, but a lot of that fear, I think, just as a church, as individuals, as leaders, like no matter where you find yourself or what you're talking about, there's this peer pressure that you put on yourself where it's like, well, they're expecting this from me, or they're like, as a church, they're expecting this from us, and from leaders especially. It's a lack of trust in other people's potential. Like you've already written them off as only having potential, or, well, if nobody did this in the past, no one is going to do it now. I hear that a lot.
Oh yeah.
And sure, maybe, but if nothing has changed in the message, whether you're, it's just you in a friend group or like 416, bigger church scope, whatever it is, if the message hasn't changed and no one is training people in this mindset of fulfilling potential, then of course no one is going to do it, because it's not presented to them in a way that's feasible for them to do it. And I think Saul fell into that a lot.
Yeah.
Like he was scared of the men wandering off and ambling around before a battle, so he was like, I have to hold this together myself.
Yep.
So I'm going to make the sacrifice because God chose me, and I need to make sure that I ask him first, but as long as I keep the men with me, we'll be okay. Like just them wandering around caused him so much peer pressure that he disregarded the instructions.
And going back to that idea of like Saul thinking he's bigger than God kind of thing. And like, yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic example, is like, because I think there are also people who do start to feel that way, whether it be they're already in a position of power or they're resisting something they don't want to do. It's like, well, I know better kind of thing. I know what's going on kind of. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I think the one big thing I was really thinking of with all of this is like, there's the side of like, Saul thinking he's bigger than this, and there was a period where he didn't want to give up his throne kind of thing. And just like, I think of that, again, going back to, we need to also help the ones who come after us to pass down, and trust in them that they can put up the mantle. And this even goes to like all outside walks of life, is like, even though like Saul ended up not being not being the best king and messed up in a lot of ways, like there's still purpose in that. And even more so, like throughout all the scriptures, we continue to see people who are resisting particular calls or flying off in the wrong direction kind of thing. But God still used them, and with God, they accomplished great things kind of thing. And I think about this with the congregation and like individuals as well within our lives. It's just like within a congregation, there's so many people, and like I'm guilty of this sometimes. Absolutely. I think we all are at some point or another, with just like, something has to be done, but not me.
Right.
That's what's in our head kind of thing.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, someone can really take care of this horrible thing. Like, I don't know who, but not me.
Whoever's in charge already.
Yeah.
Like, deal with it. Yeah.
Someone who knows more about this situation than I do, they'll take care of it. Someone who has more experience in this situation will surely step up. But I'm going to watch
I want to touch on that too, because I think there's a fine line that we see with Moses and with Saul, with a bunch of these.
Well, real quick, let me contribute to that, because I think I know where your head is. So I want to let you do it, but like,
all right, go ahead.
It's that feeling you get, when you look around and you're like, hey, I think I need an adult, but then you realize like, I'm the adult here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I need me to do it. But I think so many of us don't circle back to that part.
Mm-hmm.
Like for many of us, we're not there yet. Others like just never get there, but we never kind of like circle back to the idea like, okay, I need a competent like adult person to handle this. Oh, okay, that probably needs to be me, or that probably, or I know who can do it, or who can teach me how to do it, so I can handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, I think, for in the context of like our group of 416, just young adult ministry, I think that's like the switch that still needs to happen in many cases.
Mm-hmm.
For us to realize, well, we're not like high school kids anymore. We're not these college kids necessarily anymore. We're not kids. We've lived some of our life now, and we have adult experiences, and we are the ones capable and responsible enough to handle a situation that comes our way. Mm-hmm. So I hope that is part of what you're going with.
Sort of.
Okay.
I was touching
then I took it the wrong way. I'm sorry.
No, that's good too. I think especially finding the people that can teach you.
Yeah.
Because they're not necessarily always if they're handling situations already, it doesn't mean they're necessarily going to be looking for other people to handle like those situations or similar situations, because they're already working.
Yeah.
Definitely you asking can sometimes end up being a pleasant surprise for them too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it really is. What I was kind of going off of with Jaiden's comment was more like this fine line between excuses and fear and humility.
Mm-hmm.
Because whenever you hear like Moses or Saul or whoever it is in scripture say like, aren't I from the least of these? Like, I'm no one. That isn't necessarily a bad thing to say in and of itself, to realize where you're at and realize God is calling you regardless. That's really good. It could be very, it could show a lot of humility, and that's another thing we want in a leader. But when they use it instead to be like, but I don't want it.
Yeah.
So like, here's all the reasons I'm not qualified and I just don't want it. That's a problem.
Yeah. I think there needs to be a change in our understanding when we, because I think all of us have done that, where we're like, but I don't know how to do this. Like, I've never done this before. Who's going to teach me? Like, I don't have any experience with that, whatever it is. There's a difference between saying, like you're saying, like, I don't know how to do this, therefore I don't want to, and I really shouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
Or also saying, oh, wow, you think I could?
Right.
Like, I don't know how, but I can at least try it, or if you're willing to teach me, I'm willing to learn.
And that's one of the big things I was also thinking about, along the lines of, again, going back to so many people who resisted or were in different directions but did amazing things, is I think the same in our life, where like we do get on these tangents of like, thinking we know what we're meant for or what our talents are, kind of thing. And like, there's some good to that when we can recognize our skills and utilize them, but also like, I still believe there are things that, and I mean, the Bible shows us enough that there are still unexpected things that we could be meant for. Yeah. And that utilizing your challenge, or utilizing your talents, isn't the same thing as trying to avoid anything that challenges you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's nice. It's a good thing to feel comfortable and confident in your talents, but that doesn't mean that you can't accomplish other things. You may not do it as stellar as somebody else, but you can still get the job done. Mm-hmm. And if there's a need and you can meet it, then you're still doing more than just waiting for the thing you're good at to come along.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, kind of on that note, what are other things we kind of hide behind? Because we have the really funny bit where like Saul's hiding amongst all the luggage and all the stuff there. Like, he was literally hiding, but like, what are things that we hide behind?
I think I hide behind resources. Kind of like what we were talking about. Like, if somebody asks me, hey, do you know how to do this? And I might be like, well, I kind of do. But in my head, I'm like, I know it's going to be difficult. I know there could be trial and error. Oh, but I know somebody else who does know how to do this. So let me just pull out all of my resource cards, contact this person, and they'll help you. And then it's not my problem. I definitely have done that before.
Yeah,
that's a good one.
That's a really good one. Just sort of being, instead of being the person to have a solution, just being like a receptionist and just how many direct calls.
You kind of you feel like you've been helpful too. It's like, oh, I did such a good thing today. Them to go ask this other person.
Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes that's important. Being able to make those connections is important, but for most of the time, when somebody comes to us asking us something, is because they think we know how to do it. Yeah. And that means that we're also projecting some sort of impression that we do know more than maybe we actually do. So it behooves us to be willing to say, well, I'm not entirely sure, or like, yeah, I do know how to do it. It's gonna take us a while, but I know how to do it. Mm-hmm. Or I may not be sure, but like, why don't we find out together, or why don't we go together to so and so, or to still be involved and to still like learn how to resolve that problem for the next time it shows up.
Yeah.
What are some other things you hide behind?
I hide behind a lot of words. I think that's a very common trap for people. But like, I as time goes by, I feel like we get so good at articulating the excuses, and that like justifies layer upon layer. Like for me, it's like, I mean, that's a big thing in competitive gaming, and like a huge thing in like I'm sure a lot of competitive things is like when someone loses, they can spill a paragraph and how everything's not fair and I deserve this win because blah blah blah.
If
but
only
like,
this didn't happen, I would
Yeah,
have gotten
yeah.
that point. If this person didn't look at me wrong, I would have been fine. Like,
but yeah,
Yeah.
it spills over into
Mhm.
life stuff too, kind of
Yep.
thing. It's a very dangerous step because it's not even, we're not even admitting our base fears anymore. It's that thing.
In some cases, we're not even admitting defeat.
Yeah, it's that thing of thinking we're above it all.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And like at the end of the day, you don't learn anything from that. You don't grow from that kind of thing.
No, yeah. If you were, it's one thing to say like, "Hey, I failed," or "This didn't happen because X, Y, Z," and then you like work on those things so that next time X, Y, Z isn't a problem. Okay, that's one way to do it. But for most of us, it's like we just highlight, "Oh, X, Y, Z were the problem,"
not me.
but the next time it's still the same problem.
Yeah.
I think we hide behind other people, and not in the same way as like pulling out like the resource card, as Jaiden put it, but we're like, oh, I decided to act this way because I'm thinking of my family, or I'm thinking of my friends, or I'm thinking of this group, and they just like, I can make the call, like no one can handle this right now, like we just need to step away, or and I'm not saying that in some cases that's not a valid reason, like sometimes it really is, so don't get me wrong, but I think that sometimes maybe it starts out as a valid reason and then it just drags and drags and you're like, yeah, we're not yet, maybe a little bit longer. And again, like if there's a real reason, don't take this the wrong way. Like I just think that sometimes we can make it
is something that somebody could hide behind, for
Yeah.
sure. For sure. So we talked about in the lesson the statement to err on the side of caution is still an error. Can we talk about this a little bit more? What do you guys think of that?
I never made a full connection about that phrase, because I always thought err on the side of caution was just to be more careful but then succeed. I never thought of it being like, I would rather fall softly than hard. Like I never thought of it that way. I always just thought of it as, well, I could jump all in, or I could hold back a little and see if I still get the results I'm looking for. So it was really interesting to hear it put a different way. Like an error is an error. Like it's still, you're still not getting the results you want or need.
Right. And it would be, and it is nice to like fall on something soft instead of falling on something hard, but most of the time we'd rather just not fall at all. And I think that's kind of the thing about that statement, at least for me. It's like, yeah, we can be more careful, and there's plenty of time where that's the appropriate action. But when it comes to living out our potential as Christians, that's not the way we're supposed to live. We're supposed to give it our all, and do it at 100% every time, and not just wherever we might fall gently. And anyway, that's what I thought about that. I don't know. If you have more to say about that.
I don't have. I think you explained it well. I didn't have any huge comment about that. It does remind me of different stories throughout Scripture where people, going back to like Saul's problem with trust in God, particularly. So many times we see them almost doing the right thing, but just doing it slightly different because they don't trust enough, and then the result is still still the same, where it's like, but Lord, I was doing what you said. And he's like, yeah, but I told you to do it this way. And you decided to do it this way because you thought it would be safer. You thought it would be easier. You thought it would be better, whatever the reason. And the consequence, I guess, ends up usually being about the same as if you just hadn't tried at all. So in that case, as Christians in our spiritual lives and our talents, I think that's definitely something we need to like analyze for ourselves.
For sure. Yeah, we really got to kind of weigh out what that is, and ideally choose God's way each time, so that it's just that's the way we do it, and that's, you know, it might be hard or harder, but that's the way it needs to go. So, anything else? Any other like sort of final thoughts? Because we're in our last few minutes here.
Yeah, you know, just that air of caution idea is just, I mean, you guys have pretty much said it all. It can easily slip into air of caution to just doing nothing, and it's a very like flip-flop thing about it, you know, is like I feel that, like, you know, air of caution idea in the moment is easier and softer kind of thing, but ultimately we don't see as much results from it, as opposed to like giving our all every time. We might fall, we might get banged up a few times, definitely, but things get easier and we accomplish a lot more.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think one of the huge things I've been thinking about, of just like this idea of, like, you know, fear of failure, fear of this, fear of that, you know, is just like, yeah, like I think it's definitely an issue in the congregation, outside the congregation, within every one of our lives. But, like, you know, college age, definitely, but there's times before, times after, where like we need to accept that certain responsibility for service in our congregation, our church family, the families we have in the future, as well as being responsible for ourselves. That stuff is coming. No matter what we do, or how we try to justify us not doing something right now, or cautioning it, that stuff is coming.
Yep.
So
we'll have to deal with it regardless.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's like it will be scary at times, it will be hard at times, but like it's only going to be worse for ourselves if we continue to resist against it.
Yep.
I think the thing to take away, because like this was kind of like a ranty lesson, I feel like, just the way it was written. It's kind of ranting on all of like Saul's failures, and there were many. But I think it's important to know, like, he was rightfully afraid of a lot of things.
Yeah.
Like, God chose him, and that's great. You know, if God came and chose me, I would be like super afraid. I think what we need to remember with potential is it's okay to be afraid, as long as you are trusting God and you go for it anyway.
Moving
Or
forward.
if you feel like for some reason there's something you shouldn't go for, like, seek out counsel. Saul had Samuel to counsel him, and that wasn't, and that again, trusting the people around you, trusting God, and working towards those, you know, those things to fulfill your potential is better than just being afraid and acting rashly.
Yeah, because
So
I
I
mean,
think
because
that's-
most of the errors that Saul committed were all self-inflicted.
Yeah.
It wasn't like he had some like nefarious advisor, some Jafar type person saying like, "Hey, you should do this other thing and not listen to God." No, like he had Samuel right there to encourage him along the way. He had other advisors, he had other priests even. And they were all like, well, listen to God, do what God says, do the thing that you're supposed to do. And he's like, nope, I'm just going to do my thing. And it is self-inflicted.
It is. And I think that's the other important thing. It's not that Saul just said, no, I'm not going to act. He acted.
Yeah.
He took action every time. It's just, it was a rash, not thought through, very selfish decision.
Scared decision,
driven by fear. So just because you're acting and you're going through with it doesn't mean you're doing it right. If you're doing it solely out of fear and solely out of feeling like I have to do this myself.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Potential, like fulfilling potential is not a journey you are really supposed to take by yourself.
No, of course not. You're supposed to lean on your support structures, and that for us, you know, that's the church, that's God, that's all of the people that came before us who have the experience.
And I say that just because I feel like a lot of times when we think like, oh, finding your talents, fulfilling your potential, it feels like a very lonely journey where I have to know myself and I have to figure out what I'm good at. And sure, you will discover that along the way, but most of the time people don't figure it out by themselves. They figure it out because they have other people and they go through situations and events.
by doing
Yeah,
the
so-
different things. Yeah,
Anyway, that was just the last. It's a different point, but it's the last minute.
it's a good point. It's a really good point.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Good. So we have a couple minutes. Go ahead.
I was just like a little bit alongside of that is just also being there for those who thought they had a certain direction as their thing for a long time, but then are going in a big transition kind of thing. You know, is like
that's really important because that is part of the support structure that we have. It's like, well, sometimes our potential isn't necessarily, it's not realized, not because we weren't trying or because we didn't want to, but because other things do get in the way.
Yeah.
Or it's not the right time to realize that potential.
Mhm.
And we do need support from everybody else to be like, you know what, it's okay. We're gonna work through it. We're gonna find out what the true potential was, or what the next thing that you're gonna do. Because that's the thing about all of us, is that we're kind of born with multiple layers of potential.
Mhm.
We can be a variety of things.
Mhm.
We're not just set on one thing or the other. And sometimes, like in what you thought you were going to do in your childhood or in your high school years, maybe you do that for a little while, but then it turns out that's not it for the rest of your life. Sometimes you have to realize that you had one potential that you fulfilled. Now it's time to fulfill another. And that happens all the time. And it's doing your best to not get discouraged in between, and relying on the support structures that you do have to help you through to the next place.
Personally, I can't tell you guys how many times I've had someone point out my potential to me.
Mhm.
Like, going off of what Nellie said, like, there are so many things that I would like never think I could do, and someone's like, "No, yes you can. Go, like, try it, do it." And then
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, I can do it." And it's
Or
so
like when you've been doing something, but you never had like a name for it
yeah.
until someone says, "Hey, you're this," and like, I am.
Uh-huh.
It's like it like clicks, even though like for a while you're like, what am I supposed to do? But you are doing stuff.
You're doing it. Yeah.
There's a lot of things there, and we could go on and on talking about potential, unrealized or otherwise. It's a deep well that we could be pumping for a while. But I think this is all we have time for. This is all we're gonna leave it for tonight. For all of you guys watching, just know, like, potential. Everybody has potential, and God is prepared to help you reach it. It's just you have to follow what He says. You have to make use of your support structures that He's already given you to make it to where you need to go. And you got to overcome the paralyzing power of fear. It's just something we all have to do. Again, we don't have to do it alone, but we all have to do it. But that's all we've got for tonight. Thank you so much to everybody for watching us. Thank you, Paul and Jaiden, as always, for being with us and for the discussion of our Bible book club. Next week, the lesson is. Do you remember? I forgot. I told you, but I forgot it. The Heart of Faith. There it is. That's next week. And we'll have some additional guests. I think Paul and Jane will be back with us again next week, but we'll have additional guests with us as well. And then remember, after next week, we're taking 1 week off, and then we're back together to continue in our series. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Jay. Have a good night, everybody. We love you. Be safe. Good night.